Look, I was frankly impressed that you guys managed to pull off something that was satisfying and powerful that wasn't my intention.
The subtle shade in that, that's very impressive, Chaz.
Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Chaz Fisher.
And I'm Stu Willis.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a podcast where two Aussie filmmakers try to work out what makes great screenplays work, or in this case, a okay screenplay?
Don't flatter yourself like that, Chaz.
I can't call it great when I wrote it.
This time period's episode is looking at a short film called The Snip, which was written by Chaz, who joins us as a guest, I guess. I don't know how this works. And the director, Ben Mizzi, who most definitely joins us as a guest to kind of talk through production and taking a script from an idea, which in this case was Ben's idea, taking it through to a screenplay and then shooting it and post-producing it. And now they're on the eve of launching it online. So the rest of the world, it's had a festival run, but now it's the rest of the world's going to get the chance to see it. And full disclosure, I edited the film. So we're kind of all creatively involved in this to some extent. But, you know, this is not a editing podcast, so we won't talk so much about the editing, only in the context of narrative, I guess.
Welcome, Ben.
Hi, how are you going? Thanks for having me.
So, excitingly, you dear listeners can watch the film now. After I wrote it under Ben's development, Ben went away and produced it, and we're both super happy with the result. There'll be a link in the show notes. But in case you're interested, the broad pitch is that it's a rom-com about a guy who decides to get a vasectomy without telling his wife.
Yep, pretty much.
And that's the one sentence summary that you pitched to me, Ben, all those years ago, that made me go, oh, fuck, yes, I would love to write that. Can I ask, though, what drew you to that idea?
Oh, well, it's just always been one of those things of, I guess I'm married, and so it was just that question came up quite a bit of when you're having kids and what way do you shut up family, really? Like, it's how do you make it so that, you know, they feel bad about asking you all the time? And I guess that's a relatable human experience that, yeah, I mean, that's what you're trying to look for comedy, right? You're looking for those universals that can kind of...
I think it's that idea that comedy is someone trying to do the heroic thing but lacking the tools with which to do it, right? That's kind of like the Steve Kaplan idea of what comedy is. And in this case, as much as saying a guy getting a vasectomy without telling his wife, what it means is he's trying to do something to help their marriage, and which in this case is that kind of pressure to have kids, but he lacks the kind of tools, for lack of a better word, emotional intelligence. He kind of lacks the emotional intelligence to understand why what he's doing would potentially be wrong. And that's kind of where the comedy comes from, as well as kind of the relatable aspects of, yes, when are you having kids?
So when are you having kids?
So when are you two having kids?
So when are you guys having kids?
So what I kind of hope our listeners can get from this is what it would be like to both be a writer brought on board to work for a director we're both kind of emerging filmmakers, and also, you know, what they can learn is from our experiences to hopefully how to do it better. I mean, I'm very happy with the result, but I think you and I both had we were not the most efficient in bringing this script to screen.
It kind of was, though. I mean, if you look at comparable films of scale and the best thing is we got all our problems out on the page, so we weren't really getting too many things we were running into, problems on set that we had to address, which was definitely a highlight of actually really trying to smash the material and make sure it, you know, beat it into shape and make sure it's the best thing it can be.
So what made you want someone, because you are a writer and Stu and I have both read your work and you are, you know, just as talented as we are at writing. So what made you want an outside writer for this project?
Oh, thank you for the compliment. But yeah, I think it's attention, right? Like particularly with comedy, it needs to sit in that sort of creative tension space. I don't have any kids. You have two. And I think that's kind of what you need to do to smash them together, and particularly finding, the moments from either side where the common points become those peaks that you kind of go, okay, let's hit these moments, I suppose. It also probably helps to get it done quicker in some weird ways, because there's a pressure and there's a accountability too. As much as maybe it took 12 months to write it, but that's life getting in the way and just general hurdles of production, I suppose. But yeah, I think because we could push off each other, there's a lot of benefit to the tension, I suppose, and not in a bad way. Just we're fighting for the best idea, right? And that's ultimately what you have to do to make a film. I think you just have to get some obstacles and try and overcome them by bouncing them off. We become each other's first audience, which is helpful, as opposed to sitting in a void trying to make each other makes yourself laugh is probably less fruitful.
So you didn't really know much of my writing work at the time that you entrusted me with this fantastic idea. So if you can try and cast your mind back to then, what kind of writer were you looking for?
Oh, I mean, it's one of those things of Australia's a funny place to meet writers, because it is that element of, I guess, seeing what people have done to then work with them. I'd heard you in the podcast, and I knew enough of your character from that I thought this could probably work as a collaboration that we'd both enjoy. And I guess it was just
why Chaz? Not me. We had this has come up again recently, where it's like, hi Stu, we've got a project for Chaz. Can you please pass on his email address? Thanks.
Well, I think it's the kids thing too, right? Chaz is probably one of the only people I know who's a writer with kids trying to do this, and I think it was that sort of tension to come from two different sides. Because again, I guess that's the point of this film, where everyone's kind of right and wrong in their own ways, and I wanted to make it such that it is a bit of a prism where you can see it from your perspective and you'll get a different reflection. And so I think that was part of the thing I was trying to do. It's not just, a film like this particularly can seem like it bags out on the parents, and I think it gives them a bit of a rough time to a degree, but it also is a good little reflection point where, the audience can empathize with his mother particularly, for her story and feeling like expected to have kids, and then when she finds out she can't, that devastation stuff actually kind of matters, and it brings on a part of the audience we otherwise wouldn't have, I suppose.
So you're saying my only qualification required was that I had had unprotected sex?
Well, at least twice, but
clearly Chaz didn't write the jokes in this script.
Just to be fair to Ben, the biggest laugh in the film is a pun that I desperately tried to cut at every point, and Ben kept putting it back in there.
Well, it's because you have to. I mean, puns are great, and puns are, the highest form of comedy.
I'm putting my balls in your court.
To put it in a broader social context, what Ben is saying is that he was looking for a writer that had experience outside of his experience to bring something to a project that he was working on, right? Like he's saying, I'm dealing with having the pressure to have kids, but I want to work with a writer that's had kids and is on the other side of that debate. And I think that tension is part of the project. And I know that's aside from the writing, but it's important, that kind of drawing. And personally, to me, it's something that I look for in creative collaborations, is working with people that have different life experience, because frankly, my life is boring as it is. So, it's kind of more exciting to partner with someone who's coming from a different place, right?
Yeah, and I think it's on the screen, and I think that result, makes it happen, and it was good. It was definitely, it definitely gave us, and again, I probably procrastinate too much, and I'm probably working on too many different things. So being able to have Chaz's lawyer focus as well is probably helpful to keep it moving along.
Lawyer focus is his obsession with structure and time management.
Well, like, as much as that's a bit of a joke, I mean, I think that's one of the things as a director, I bounce around between a bunch of projects. It's helpful for me, at least, to have that focus and that, get it done, have a deadline, have some accountability, I suppose. What did you get from it then, I guess, Chaz, in that way? Like, why did you sign on and say yes?
Oh, I mean, the main reason I signed on is I loved the idea. Like, the film unfurled in my head just from that sentence. And you obviously had a lot of material and ideas to get the ball rolling. And I think it was only a couple of weeks before we had a first draft. It was then just as you said, bouncing it back and forth and finding, you know, because there would be things that you didn't like and things that I didn't like. And the process for us is every time to find the best idea, and it turned into the best idea, but it would take a 3-hour phone call each time to get there. But what did I get? I got my work produced. I had complete faith in your commitment to making it, and you did. So what brought me to the project was the idea and the promise of having my work produced well. The film speaks to that, and I think, you know, there's a lot of screenwriters out there who have careers but have very little, if any, material actually made. So that was a great privilege. And, you know, you and I have done some noodling and development on a feature version of the idea, and I think, you know, there's potential future there as well. So that's why I did it. Idea, produced credit.
I think there's things that's beyond the credit. I'm speaking on your behalf here, Chaz, as I like to do, which is that things like you going, I kept on pushing to cut a line, and you're collaborating with someone who decided to keep a line, and then learning that it works. There's no other way to get that experience except through getting stuff made. It's not just about the credit. I think there is an upper limitation of how good your craft can be as a screenwriter if your stuff doesn't go on the screen. It's kind of like, by definition, that's what a screenwriter is. And, you know, if this is absolutely my bias, but I think that is what makes getting stuff valuable. So you can see what the influence of music and score can do to tone, what actors can bring to a role, what you need on the page, and then conversely, what you can cut when it gets on screen, right? As well as the experience of working with a director, which in this case, it's Ben's idea. So he's got a little, and that's my turn to speak on Ben's behalf. But, you know, like there's a lighthouse, you know, there's that when you've got an idea, you got that, particularly as a director, you kind of got that lighthouse. And in this case, that's Ben's pitch to you that he's trying to move the project towards. And then you might be pulling it into other directions and he's listening to his instinct. And that's very different than working on a spec script where you're answerable only to yourself.
Absolutely.
For most writers, if we have careers, we're not going to be answerable only to ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's probably very accurate. And I think it's also... Yeah, I mean, it's also what we bring to the projects in those ways do complement as well. Like, I guess I'm chasing jokes and making it move fast, and Chaz kept pushing back on the emotional resonance of the two, like the central relationship, which, you know, is always that tension too, and that's, you know, wearing director and producer hats in some ways, going, oh, let's make it funny, let's not make it have any dead air really, and that's the punching in the material and the massaging out the air bubbles, I suppose. You know, and yeah, I mean, that's what. I guess the emotional elements are what Chaz particularly brings to it in that way as well.
So what changed then from your perspectives? And I'm kind of interested. I want Ben to go first. Like, was there a first draft? I guess this is process, right? I'm thinking of what's the difference between the first draft and the final draft. But now I realize the question that kind of precedes that is, how did you get started once you've pitched an idea? What was the kind of process?
Well, principally, I think it was we caught up at the pub as Draft Zero seems fitting, and then we were sort of making those columns where we had like a feature because this was kind of a short to feature project and looking at that, and then, you know, making the column A, column B stuff. So what was going to go in the short was here, and what went in the feature was there, and we were sort of bouncing that back and forth, and then eventually finding the most manageable version of the idea where we can, you know, take our characters and get this sort of story told funnily and clearly to the audience, but then leaving all the extra stuff to the side for further work. And then I guess from there it was just putting the bits together in the structure of the story. And I guess finding that moment of relatability for the two characters, to our two leads really. And particularly making Aaron, the character of Aaron, not seem entirely unmotivated. I mean, part of this is it's a comedy of errors and a comedy of manners, I suppose, where both Aaron and Cameron are talking against each other in a weird way. So it's setting up that relationship so that you do buy that he's doing what's right for her, and
in his mind,
and, you know, sort of trying to make that actually have a level of justification that at least we follow his logic. And I think that was the main thing we were working on from the start, of making sure that, to his mind, he was doing a really solid thing for her. And, it was going to be a ta-da, I have a vasectomy, we don't have, and play that moment. And as you work the material, it's like, well, you can't just come out and say it, and hiding it and then making it a comedy as well, burying it in stuff that becomes fun, and the reveal of that story to the audience allows you to have everyone have different perspectives of it with your actors and giving them room to perform, and also having the audience just enjoy the journey.
So how do you think, fixating specifically on the Aaron thing, how did you kind of try to address that? Was there anything specific, like a specific moment that you added or took away that made you go, yeah, okay, we've done that, and particularly having seen it produced, that you've been able to go, oh yeah, we solved that? Was it more kind of like a something that you kind of solved over time?
It's a bit of one of those things that's a bit of a mush now because it's been a while since we did all that sort of process. But I guess it was just trying to make sure that we could justify his read of his wife, right? So when in the movie, that I guess the main thing was that Cameron kind of makes some scenes where she kind of, if you were through his perspective, gives him permission to go and get a vasectomy to shut his mum up. And it's probably the scene in the car is the bit that we probably spent the most time on of what if I did get a vasectomy, this would probably solve it, right? And she's like, yeah, I guess that would solve it. And then he goes and does it, but doesn't tell her, but thinks in that moment that he's got her permission to do it, or that it will be a thing that rewards her and both of them.
That was fucking genius.
Yeah. I think it worked.
I can't believe you told your mum you're shooting blanks.
I know. What if I were?
What?
Shooting blanks.
Oh, it'd be nice to ditch the bloody pill for a start.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it wouldn't change anything. I mean, I don't want kids, I want you. But you're not, right?
Thought you said it didn't matter.
Oh, and it doesn't. But it'd be nice to know, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that car scene is probably the thing where they really focused as writers, we focused our efforts trying to make that believable.
Yeah.
What's interesting from my perspective, having edited that scene we did a bit of work on. Like not in a negative sense, not like, oh, this was a challenging scene, but that scene, because I think it was so important, felt like we put a lot of energy into making sure it was working, because it's a pivotal, in a way, it's kind of the first act turning point, right?
Yeah.
You could say that the end of the first act is him getting the vasectomy, but in a way, it's actually the decision to do it.
Yeah.
Them misread each other, yeah.
Yeah. Comedy of errors or misinterpretation, they misread each other, but it then coming from a kind of genuine place.
Yeah.
Because that is the danger, right? Making this character come across as, because when you hear the pitch, you're like, oh, it's a bit of a douchey thing to do, as opposed to, no, it's just a idiotic thing. Not an idiotic thing, but it's like that kind of like well-meaning, but completely misinterpreted.
We had to thread quite a needle to make it feel like, his decision was justified, like that this was a sensible decision, that this was kind of the only recourse he had to get the outcome he wanted, which was to shut his family up. And then there was also we had to make sure that he did enough asking of Cameron, like asking of his wife, are you really sure you don't want kids, but not asking her about the vasectomy, because that's his flaw. That's the tools that he's lacking. Going back to your earlier point, Stu, is that he doesn't actually want to ask her permission, but he does want to check in. And so that was the hard needle to thread to, as you say, Stu, make sure that he's not a complete douche.
Yeah, the permission thing's interesting. I'm just thinking from a character point of view, it's like him showing that he can take responsibility. It's this weird thing that he thinks by not asking permission, he is taking responsibility. That was always my kind of interpretation of that.
I'm just trying to take responsibility for birth control.
That's definitely one of his justifications. And so a lot of what Ben's feedback to me from my memory of the development process is we need more at the front. We need more pressure on him. We need more reasons from him. We need more of him reaching out to Cameron. While we needed more of that, we couldn't extend the screen time at all. And we couldn't have more scenes. Because we wanted to get to the vasectomy. That was the... And to me, it's a problem that plays out in longer form storytelling as well, is, your story works when the setup is all done right.
Well, that's sort of where I think the relationship between between our two leads was fantastic, because they bring with them, and again, they're both married, so it's sort of fascinating to that, but they're not to each other.
Not to each other, yeah.
But that they totally fell into those shoes really quickly, and there was totally a relationship built there. And I think that comes to an earlier point, for both of you, and particularly Stu, is we spent a lot of time editing that party sequence, because that party sequence was kind of the bit where, and as I remember now, we were almost going to open it with the slow motion thing of kids being horrible and like terrible, and like this was, Apocalypse Child, and we kind of moved away from that to come back to that interrogation, which again hits the pressure and the pressure and the pressure. And, there's that montage of stuff, and it was a whole day of shooting that becomes literally 30 seconds of screen time, which is just the process, as frustrating and as, 40-degree days sweating it out leads you to have. And we just chop the hell out of it. And then you get straight back into the car, and now you totally are with our characters, that we have those reaction shots of the couple just getting slammed, but because they're together, all that backstory that we were trying to push kind of gets to drop away because the actors are bringing that, chemistry and relationship as well.
Yeah, seeing there's nothing, guess what it is? There's nothing quite like seeing the two of them on the screen together, standing up to the family to visually reinforce this idea that they're a united front, Whereas I think that's kind of a harder thing to, like, coming back to earlier episodes like Unfilmables, it's the kind of thing that you would probably explain in the script. We see them together, but it's not going to have the same feeling as just seeing it. Like, it can't. The experiences are fundamentally different, right? Like, that visual reinforce, like, I'm trying to think how you could write it on the script in such a way that it carries when you don't have performance, and I'm not sure you can. And it is always that balance. I think short films are hard for that reason, that kind of setup versus payoff versus pace. I think because people have such a negative view of shorts, even like, because you premiered at Flickerfest, which is a very prestigious Australian short film festival. And I remember there was someone who's unconnected to the, they went this year, unconnected to Flickerfest, saying, I'm going on a date to Flickerfest to see some shitty short films. And it's like, wow, if that's your impression of Flickerfest, then that's just like an overall marketing impression of short films. So I think you're actually naturally fighting an audience that doesn't trust shorts when they should. If you sit down to a feature, your assumption is not going to be that it's badly made. Whereas I think when people sit down with shorts, it is. So there's a lack of patience for them.
But I also think that it's a little bit of a programming thing of like not knowing what you're going to get most of the time with short film festivals, where they're all across the board. And I think, and we had some pretty good shorts. We were lucky because we opened our session and then we closed.
Oh, great.
So that was fantastic. But then it became a really dark sort of, that particular session was quite dark. Whereas the other one that we played that Chaz actually saw, we closed out a rom-com session. And because the rom-com was this whole session was much more of a piece, I think it played probably better but there was just a high quality of films in that sort of style. Whereas, when you had all different types of shorts, some were much darker and pretty sad, and some, in one they murder a dog, and you kind of have all those different things. I mean, that's where you get, short film festivals may lose audiences that way. But I think that's more of just a tone in them knowing what they're going to expect. But that was why I was really eager for this particular film to really grab you from the outset and actually just go, because don't let them get settled into their seats and get ready to be bored. Just start giving them laughs straight away, and then you can kind of build into it. There's some moments at the end there where everyone sort of quiets down, and then you can hit them with the big pun at the end. So it's more grabbing your audience, I suppose, which is, it's that, I think that's just speeding up short films is probably not a terrible thing as just a guideline for most people making shorts anyway,
Do you think that would change the way that you would develop another short? That your experience doing this would change the way you would kind of make another short film?
I still think that it's like you have to be efficient as a director and hitting those moments of efficiency and really finding the moments to like convey as much information quickly, set up the scenario, and then get on, and then you can sort of slow down a little bit. But I think you have to deliver the punch because otherwise the audience is like, what the hell did I just watch? Too many short films, I think, hold it to the end and the audience is like, I guess it's going to be revealed at the end. And then when the reason short films get a bad rap sometimes is because that's not a satisfying revelation, that because they're back-ending the conceit of their movie, sometimes it misfires with audiences, particularly at short film festivals.
Yeah, and I think I get what you're saying in terms of, which is an interesting thing. When we go and see feature films, we're normally not going and seeing features or television blind. We've got some idea through marketing, word of mouth, like just through osmosis about what things are, so we can kind of mentally prepare them. Where with shorts, most of the time you're unaware about what you're about to go to watch and what the emotional contract with an audience, which means you kind of probably have to establish, I'm speculating here, but you might have to establish tone a little bit more, or like up front be a little bit more like, this is what this is, so people aren't disappointed. Because as you say, if you're dragging it out, if it's not a clear answer, then people may get frustrated.
Well, you can feel it. I think you can feel it in the room when that happens. And I mean, I'm not trying to bag out other shorts, but I just think that that's sort of when we, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong there, Chaz, but in that rom-com day, it was just everyone was laughing from the get-go. The caliber was really good, and because they were continuing in that same mindset, I guess it's going on after a good or a bad room as a stand-up in some ways. Where if it's still all pretty of a high caliber, then it's fantastic. And again, that's just the nature of short film production and the reality of that side of the business.
But I think this is good for us to talk about because our listeners may be considering writing shorts, maybe considering producing their own shorts. And I think it's worth talking about what expectations you can have of an end product if you're going to write one.
Well, Patron Yoakum, and I want to get to more of this at the end, he's actually specifically asked me about some advice to do with the fact that he's now produced 2 short films and he's trying to figure out his approach to the film festival circuit and et cetera, et cetera. Were you thinking about your marketing strategy during writing and during production? Was that a conscious thing for you, Ben and Chaz?
I mean, for me, it was a little bit in the sense that, I mean, as a side business, I make EPKs for TV shows and stuff. So I've sort of seen that marketing side of things. And so I think, that was always notable in production. Maybe not in writing as much, but in production, we definitely, like getting the photos and getting the material and getting the assets to actually have all that stuff for the festivals. And then we put a lot of effort into our, actual poster, I guess, and that sort of key art side of things, which I think plays really well. And we sort of stole it off the back of the, some of the other stuff that came up in the actual film. It's those 2 iconic, the hand with the blue gloves kind of plays as a bit of a gag back to, Aaron Jeffries' sort of role there. You're fighting this whole pile of movies on Netflix now. How do you stand out? But I don't think at the script level it came through too much.
Yeah, I mean, as the writer, I was not in any way focused on. I was trying to make the best version of what we wanted to pull off, but I was very aware that the market for shorts and the market for shorts generally is film festivals and airplanes, as far as I'm aware. So if your market is film festivals, I also knew that there were very few film festivals that were looking for shorts that were of the genre that Ben and I were trying to make. The very narratively driven, broad, romantic comedy. They might program features like that, but as Ben was saying, most of the shorts in the first program that he went to were not of our ilk. And, we were used as counter-programming, but I was certainly feeling at the beginning that this was never going to be like a prestige short festival film, and it kind of felt at the outset that there was certain film festivals that we should target because those festivals wanted shorts that would please an audience and make them laugh.
That all said, though, we were at least advantaged by being a bit counter-programming because we got to play a few more times. We got a few more festival runs. I think most films at that festival only got one screening. We had 2, and then we went on their roadshow for Flickerfest. We also played, a couple. We played a couple slots at Cinefest in Perth. So that actually kind of worked to our favour in a way of going the other way and counter-programming as much as, it was one way, it also served us the other.
More specifically, was running, like, we don't think of it as marketing, but it is, like, running length. Were you consciously trying to get it down to under a certain page count or under a certain running length?
Like getting it as short and as fast as we could always, but having that servicing a story. And, I mean, you'd probably play more if it was a 7-minute film. I'm sure we'd get even more, but I think you lose that sort of, it's actually kind of a complicated narrative structure to thread on this one any shorter than it currently is. I think that you have to follow these characters and have that level of understanding of what the hell they're doing, and that in this weird bastard logic, it kind of makes sense that he thinks this is an acceptable thing, and then you can reverse it, So, yeah, I think we definitely cut it to as funny as it could be, and also as fine-tuned as it could. We dropped a couple scenes that we shot. There were definitely stuff that came out. But at the same time, I mean, we had a scene where the actors kind of suggested some extra rewrites, which in the rehearsal, and it turned out to be really good. It was just really narrativizing. It was the scene in the hallway. You probably remember this too, Chaz, where they were sort of like, he doesn't actually have to do what his mum says when she rocks up to the house. Yeah. And they just literally clarify it, and it kind of works because you can, again, have that extra moment of change and turning point stuff that it's finding those moments where we think, as the audience, we can see his logic happening and occurring, but we're with her, but we understand him entirely and what he's about to do, and they juxtapose each other really well. And I think their thoughts to bring it and actually really identify that scene as just a reaffirmation of he doesn't have to actually do this and doesn't have to listen to his mum is always helpful for comedy in some ways, and just clearly identifying the stakes.
Well, that didn't last very long.
What, one little setback and you bail?
What do you think is going to happen when she finds out that you're not infertile? Yeah, that's right. She's going to think I'm the one who's broken. What are you, 12? Grow up and stand up to your mother.
Like we haven't been down that road already. They're just going to keep asking over and over again. She can't make you get tested.
She can't make you get tested either.
We're so close. We are so close. You take the heat for this, and they'll never ask us again.
It's not worth it.
It is to me. I need this. Well, I'm not giving up.
I would counter what you're saying to an extent where I've got a folder in the Snip scripts, which is called Brutal Cut, because I think I got to a draft where I was happy that I think was somewhere around 18 or 20 pages, and you pushed me, again, on the page before you got to production, to just get it down to the barest of bare bones. And then actually, from memory, we then added a few more jokes and gags in, but we did, in the development process, cut it way, way, way back. And I think in the edit, you were also conscious, weren't you, Ben, of trying to hit, like, to not be over 20 minutes?
Oh, wait, yeah, 20 minutes is way too long. Like the shorter, I mean, again, the shorter the better. You know that's a reality of short films, where if you can be a 3-minute thing, you'll get screened heaps more than if you're a 10-minute so-so production. But we're a 16-minute, pretty decent production, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of that awareness that if you're a 15-minute short, you have to be as good as the 2 7-minute shorts that you're replacing. That's just from a pure programming perspective. But that kind of is in terms of being aware of your quote-unquote marketing strategy is part of it, right?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
I don't think it's exactly that criteria, but I could see a situation where someone's programming a festival and they're kind of culling it down and go, these are these 2 things that we love, and there's this one thing that we love, but maybe not quite as much that otherwise would have got in, but because of the length, they all take it out to make room for other things. It's just how these festivals go, right? I mean, look, my VCA short film was 18 minutes, and it's kind of like a super serious sci-fi. So, I mean, it did pretty well on the festival run, but that was definitely a learning aspect of it.
Yeah, and I'm appreciative, Ben, that from my memory and my file management, you did push us to go, I think, from a comedy perspective, where we went too far. We cut it back too far in writing and then started putting stuff back in. I think that was a worthwhile development exercise.
From an editing point of view, I don't think we did on the Snip, but dating back to like my undergraduate days, we do this thing called the Trot Fest edit of a short, where you try to get the short under 7 minutes. just to see if you can. And then you look at it and go, oh, cool. You kind of learn what you need, because it's very easy, particularly when you're starting out, to go, we got to cut it. We got to cut stuff faster. And then you actually cut it to see how fast you can go. And you're like, that's bloody incoherent. That's like, Transformers bloody Last Crusade or whatever it was. It just makes no sense. And so you start putting stuff in. So there's probably a version of that where you can do that on, like, as a process if you need to unlock something creatively, like pull out everything by the bare minimum. I think there was a version of this actually, Ben, where I took some stuff out, a couple of scenes out, and then you were like, oh, that could probably go, but this one I think it needs to come back in.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also, because there were some people, particularly like Dr. Virgil's scenes, where that was just Aaron Jeffrey kind of came in and really stole the show in some ways, and he's just mucking around on set, and we just sort of built the schedule to have him play. It's the whole thing of directing of get out of your own way most of the time, right? Set it all up, let the people do their thing, and then just take credit for all the results. And so, we were going back and forth on how much do you cut, but when I saw it with people, and it made me laugh, and that's ultimately the thing, right? And so we're like, bugger it, let's just keep it in there. Let's just try and be, it's a comedy. If you don't laugh at a comedy, then you've failed more than if that's maybe harder than drama in some ways to project. Did you find that, like editing and writing it, in terms of where the audience gags are? And
yeah, I mean, I think it's harder. I agree. Like, comedy is harder than drama. There's like a technical precision required to it, and you got to have that precision and yet also make it seem effortless, right? Otherwise, you can kill the joke by being too desperate. And having worked on some comedies, on bigger comedies, like, it's not uncommon when they've got budgets that they will do preview screenings. So they'll do their test screenings and they'll literally record the audience, and then like a camera on the audience. And then in the edit, they will sync up the audience video with the edit and look at how they're pacing out their jokes. And I'm not saying that we didn't really have that opportunity to do that on a short film with this kind of budget, but you can see the idea. And if they're doing that on Lord and Miller, this wasn't a Lord and Miller project. It's like, if those guys are doing it and they're pretty funny, then it's obviously got some value. And they're not using it to be prescriptive about what they need to do, but it is informative, because there ain't nothing like an audience, right?
Absolutely.
But I guess you've also got to learn to trust your instincts, which is what you were doing with certain things about, I think this is funny and I think we should keep it this way, or this pacing. And in the end, it's going to reflect, as much as films are a product of multiple voices, there's still going to be someone who's acting as the filter, which, ideally is the director, but in the context of television can be a writing producer, hopefully, but it can also be a studio or whatever. They're filtering through and going, just that little bit longer or that little bit shorter to get that joke, and it's going to reflect their kind of sense of comedy.
And that kind of brings me to, we had a good conversation because we shot this over 2 weekends, and the first weekend, it was one of those things where we kind of went with our lead performance. Drew was great, and he did exactly the sort of stuff we needed him to do, and he's fantastic. And I was just sitting there in the edit, having looked at the dailies after the first week, and was like, have I given myself enough room to fluctuate his performance? And I hadn't directed him to fluctuate it as much, and it was just trusting that instinct. But I think they're experienced and they know what they're doing, and so you just got to trust it again and just go, all right, here's the scene, here's how we know the gags kind of land. Let's give ourselves options in performance, and maybe I'll take this to the next project, to fluctuate the tone a little bit more to give myself some range. But again, ultimately, I didn't need it, which was, again, another lesson to just remind yourselves to cast the best actors, and then just really let them play and find it and trust it, and observe them and whatever we find funny, because we were having a bloody ride on set. It was really fun. It was
I AC'd on a short film that was meant to be a comedy. And it was hilarious on set, and they didn't quite nail it in the edit, and it was kind of really off-putting.
Oh, that's sad.
So,
bugger. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think that was just more of a rushing the edit.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Because the thing is, editing takes time, and it grows exponentially, the amount of work to edit something the longer it is and the more material you have.
Yeah.
Do you think that this would change, that this experience of working with these actors and what they brought to the role, both in terms of what they worked out during rehearsal, but also some on-set improvisation for the Doctor. Do you think that would change how you would, quote-unquote, direct performance on the page? When you work with a writer or with your own stuff, how you would write the performance on the page? Do you think this experience has changed that?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I mean, my next project's more of a drama, a biopic rather than a comedy. So I think it's just watching for all the moments of space that we can fill in, and having the actors have thoughts permeate every line, and whether that's on the page or in performance. And I think it's always going to be a mixture of both, but making sure that there's plenty of spots for them to track. I'm not sure how. Yeah, I don't know, to be honest. I'll have to see.
What about you, Chaz, looking at it from the other end, where the film went off and got made, you got to see cuts, but you weren't involved in the editing. Do you think that you would write, well, specifically performance, but anything that you would change in terms of the kind of words on the page?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've already covered that just my own instinct is not necessarily going to lead to the best idea. And that's not to say that I didn't listen to my instinct. I would listen to my instinct and Ben would listen to his instinct, and then we would bash off each other until we found one that satisfied both of those instincts. And also, seeing it on screen, I am mostly a dramatic writer. I have written a couple of comedies, but this is the first time I've seen a comedy that I've written, produced, and to have audiences writing. And look, as we have covered it, Ben's development of my writing, Ben's directing of his actors' performances, the music, the edit, all those are crucial to getting those laughs. But it was nice to know that somewhere in there I can write comedy, because I just didn't know. Until you've seen your work produced, you don't know if you can write comedy. But the main thing that I do differently now is I want to make sure, and this is what Ben and I spent a lot of time on in development, is character motivations. And we've done an episode on character motivations, but to me it's so important that the audience understands exactly the character motivation that I want them to understand, because otherwise the actors, the directors, and the editors will do it for you. And I think I've spoken about this in a previous podcast, that in the climax of the film, Cameron has a response that I wrote, but somewhere in the editing process, it changed her motivation of what she was saying. And you guys made it work. I don't think I did the work on the page well enough. And Ben, the actors, and you as editor, Stu, you made it work, but it was different from the motivation that I had written.
It was the right now, wasn't it? It was the moment of right now. Like, I don't want kids right now. That was sort of where the pivot happens.
You told me you didn't want kids 1,000,000 times.
And I don't. Right now.
Right now?
If I had even mentioned that I might want kids one day, you would have had a meltdown.
So you've been lying to me this whole time?
I like knowing that we could change our minds.
It comes back to the fact that we're making movies. We're not making scripts in some ways, as much as Draft Zero is about that. I mean, there's also the soft push and direction of the writer of going, I know how to do this part. I'm not going to fight you. This is not a hill I need to die on. Because again, it's also going for that first instinct. And this is a broad comedy, right? This isn't like some layered satire. Well, even though it has reversals and it's inversions of stuff, it hits the broad appeal intentionally so that everyone's included in the joke. And I think that's the moments of clarity. I knew exactly what I was going for in that. And so we sort of shot it a few different ways, but I think that's what everyone understood. And it was pretty easy for Sophia, as far as I'm aware, to know that's, she knew exactly what we were talking about when she said that line and made that choice on camera.
Yeah, I think that the difference was, it's important that what you're saying is talking about as a substitution, that she found a different choice, but it was a choice in the performance. So it's not
what I intended as the writer.
But it works because it's a choice that, I don't even know what the shooting order was, but either it's a choice that she's made because the other scenes that she's been in have led her to play that choice in a particular way, or because she did it later that she and Ben and have then built the scenes around it to make it work. Like, ultimately, as an editor, you're just going to go for what works rather than what the original writer's intention are, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think having seen student films is I think people often see their intention, they don't see what they've actually got, and that's when they get bad work. I'm not saying that, maybe it could have been directed differently or whatever, but I think, it's communicating your intention, but I guess you also have to let go of it, right?
Oh,
it's up.
I'm very happy with the outcome.
You didn't have a whinge. You were I think you were more curious.
Oh, yeah. And I was frankly impressed that you guys managed to pull off something that was satisfying and powerful that wasn't my intention.
Cool.
Subtle shade in that. The subtle shade in that's very impressive, Chaz.
Thank you very much.
Or maybe that's why it was powerful and meaningful, because it wasn't what you intended.
I'm going to step out of this part of it, and you guys can just.
No, but I think that is worthwhile. You know, we've talked about this in terms of unfilmables, but that idea of actually making stuff clearer on the page. That yes, even though some readers, and this is kind of a bit of thing, that some readers that are particularly astute or literate will be like, well, you don't have to spoon feed me. The fact is, when it is day 4 or day 5 on a shoot and you're tired and you forgot the scene and you're literally standing up and doing like a before the block through, just doing a script read through, having that stuff on the page may help clarify for everyone what they're doing there. And I think it's easy to be divorced from that when you're sitting down as a reader going, oh, I know exactly this, you're spoon feeding me. But in the end, the document is to help people make stuff. And so maybe making things more overt, you know, is helpful. You know, there's no prize of being misunderstood, right? You can be subtle, but you can also just be invisible, or you can be confusing, you know, and some, you know, there's no prizes for that.
Ben, Stu asked you before how producing this work would change how you're writing your next piece. What I want to know is how your collaboration with me will affect how you next direct a performance from a writer.
Again, I guess it depends on the project. You know, it really depends on the project. Like if I was doing another comedy, I think I'd definitely collaborate again. You know, there's definitely comedy projects and stuff that I've been working on that I would definitely not do on my own, because I feel that energy also makes you want to come to work and do the work, right? Like there's something, and I'm pretty collaborative in that way. Even though I do a lot of roles myself, I'm always looking for that collaboration to enjoy the process. You know, we're making movies that are trying to be, and when you're making comedies particularly, they're trying to be really fun, and that's really important, I think, to have a good time with it. And so in terms of directing a performance, I think, from a writer, I think it's knowing the hills to die on and knowing when to pick the battles. Because, you know, there is a version of this where the director still gets the final say. And so which battles do you need to go to the mat on, you know, I suppose would be the main thing. Are
you saying that for me or for you?
I'm saying for me to direct your performance, right? As a writer, I think that there are certain picking your battles is basically a lot of it. If you are going to have differences of opinions, because you have to have an emotional access to the project, right? You have to have an in that makes you motivated to do it. And, you know, in particular something like a short where we're not necessarily paying you money, you have to own the side of it that you own. And so, you know, in that way, I think that's the management part of it. You know, and again, I think the logic's, because this was a logical script in some ways that works at a level of logic. Once we found the Lego pieces of story and plot, once we could put that together, I think it kind of worked. And it was just finding, do we buy the emotion stuff, you know? And it was, so we knew that those scenes, the structure was pretty solid, but it's how do we access that? And we have differences of opinions in some of that stuff. And we just, I guess, work it till we find a happy medium, which we did. And again, that's the struggle, but that's always the case in everything I guess that I work on, at least, is trying to find those emotional points of making sure the audience buys with your character, so that you're not making a movie that's, you know, for a couple people. It's a really broad comedy, you know, you're trying to find broad notes.
I mean, what would I do differently? I think I would also, as you say, pick my hills to die on better. I think one of the reasons you and I took so long to get this to the point where you were happy to shoot it and take it to production was, I think I picked too many hills to die on.
You saw every bump as a hill, Chaz.
But also, maybe part of my process as well was the fact that I am a writer and I kind of can't sit on my hands and get off the tools now. And part of my thinking of how stories work is it with a keyboard, you know. And this was maybe that was part of me trying to articulate certain problems whilst trying to respect your, like, the delineation of roles. You know, I think that I was obviously do my own writing and trying to justify logics on the page. And, you know, I guess I think through writing. And because I couldn't quite do this here, that made it somewhat of a search that you had to do some of my searching for me on my behalf, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I don't know how we delineate the roles better, because there would have been things I would have saved you from if I had written it more, had written actual stuff, outlined it, and then come back to you with here's my actual notes. But because of a variety of things, in particular, you trying to make sure that you got the writing credit, which is totally fair, and that's the role. I kept away from that, so maybe that was part of it. But I think it worked. I think it was that wasn't that terrible. And it took a little while, but life gets in the way, and we're busy. But we're not professional writers, and we're doing it interstate, and we're not really in the same room smashing stuff out. I think that would have, if we had a day or two where we could, and so what? At some point, okay, we can do it again faster next time. That's totally fine. Hopefully next time there's budgets and, more production elements that work in our favor that we can, not having to adjust as much. But you still have to. That's the nature of the beast. But yeah, I think it was a good result in all in. It wasn't so bad, was it?
Oh no, the result is I'm really happy with it.
And the process,
but. I think the process could have been a lot less painful, but I think the one thing I want to pick out of what you just said is if we had made an effort to be in the same room more, I think that would have made a real difference. And
again, it was like this is the first project we've worked on as well, so there's always going to be teething, and I think that's, again, par for the course, right? You're still figuring out how and not that we both really do comedy much either.
Yeah.
In some ways, I'd do it all again to get the result we got, is the truth of it. If we're going to end up with something crap, then, you have to reassess it. But I think because the result's strong, I would kind of proceed again the same sort of way with maybe a little bit more of an outline of feedback rounds and that energy in the room that we kind of only had energies on the phone call.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the end, you're still learning, you're working out how you work. Right?
Absolutely.
It's not like you've been... and these things take time. And this is the reason that, filmmakers tend to stick with the same crew for a long time, I think, right? Because it gives them, they get that unspoken conversation because they've been working together for so long, right? And then people's strengths and people's weaknesses and what battles are important. Chaz is going to be finicky about this, and this someone's going to be finicky about that. But you can work it up. I know Chazzy is going to be weird about his fucking writing and all his dialogue little ticks and quirks.
And his scatological obsession.
Yes. Coming back to what Joachim wanted, kind of some understanding of, talking about the marketing for the project, your film festival strategy and post-film festivals. So obviously you're getting towards the end of the process and you're thinking about, what am I going to do with this film? Did you have a particular strategy? And what would you change about that strategy, if anything?
In terms of sending it to festivals, I think, again, I definitely got a lot of advice from people who had done this before in terms of what festivals to chase. Maybe we would have sent it to a couple more, but again, it just became a price thing at some point at the back end where they get bloody expensive pretty quickly, especially if you're funding it yourself, to send it out to a lot of festivals. We send it out to a bunch and you never really hear any feedback of ones you get into or not. So, I don't really know how to judge the learnings of it because it's such a silent, the rejections are silent and the acceptances are great. So I don't really know how you would do that as much. I think that, in terms of making the documents and the marketing stuff to make it an easy sell, and everything was there for the film festivals to pick us, was definitely to our favor, I suppose.
But I just want to point out to our listeners that, Ben, one of the main jobs you do is put together behind the scenes and EPK packages for TV shows here in Australia. So you are very conscious of the materials that are required to sell a film or TV product.
Yeah, I suppose so. And I mean that's just wearing the hats and how do you practice your craft and, be a working filmmaker in Australia at this time, when they're not making a lot of stuff. And that's that's the way that I've sort of, used to capitalize on, what do you need? You need those moments to really pop, right? I'm really proud of our poster and I think it really gets, that's been very heavily complimented, which is fantastic from a lot of producers who go, they know what they're doing. But that's part of the whole confidence thing of this process, right? If you don't know what you're doing, at least appear like you do. And maybe somewhere along the way, you'll find a happy medium, right?
But I would just encourage our listeners to before they go into production. Like part of their pre should be consideration of what sales materials they want to get.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what's making, what are the images that tell your movie, right? Like what are the couple? Because every program has 3 or 4 stills that they need. But like if they're frames off the short, well then all the better, right? Like what is the image? And that's a directing thing, it's a writing thing, it's in all of the above, right? What sells your film? You know, what is that moment that becomes iconic too, right? Like, because again, you should be kind of looking for those things in everyone's favorite films has an iconic moment, I suppose, that they reflect upon and try and carry that forward. You know, I did a podcast once with Jeremy Saunders, who did a lot of Australian posters, and it was that whole thing of how do you just have to test it. And this is the same sort of thing of putting a lot of ideas up on the wall and just trying to see what sticks and don't be afraid to revise and really search for the right image. Yeah, how do you get people's attention? Because you know, it's such a rushed world now that things are going by. We're fighting an infinity, and that's sort of the battle of filmmaking now, right? In part, once you've even made it, who the hell's going to bloody see it?
I'm just going to share my own personal experience because I mentioned Payload earlier. Because I had an interesting moment with the poster when Payload premiered at Palm Springs, and I did this poster that was like a matte painting, right? Like it was a really badass looking sci-fi poster. And I remember I got some advice from the programmer for TIFF or something. She looked at it and was like, oh yeah, it doesn't look like it's going to be, it just looks like it's going to be a really soulless science fiction film that's just going to be about visual effects and stuff like that. And I showed her another photo, untreated, you know, and then she was like, that's better. That's about the family. If that's what the film's about, then the poster should reflect the kind of emotional communication of it. I ended up redesigning the poster, and that was the poster that we used when we put it out online, right? And in fact, thinking about it, because there was my poster, but then Dust did their own when it went out through Dust, and they also used a photo of the kids, right? So my original instinct, which is this really slick, high production value, you know, got a VFX artist, spent like a week doing the matte painting, in the end wasn't what people responded to. Unsurprisingly, they responded to people, which in that case was an important thing because of the genre to push against. You know, the people's expectations of the genre. So definitely thinking about your marketing material does make a difference, because in that case, she was using it to posters, because it was Palm Springs have a short film market. I don't know if they did. Don't know if it's still the case, where programmers would go and watch short films and make decisions on short films by going and watch them at Palm Springs, because it was one of the first festivals in the circuit, and they would make their decisions based on posters and synopsises. So they are important.
Interesting from a writing perspective, when I got into a film lab called the Catapult Concept Lab, one of the exercises they did is draw the poster for your film, because that exercise it's another way of trying to distill what it is about this film that will connect to people, but using a still image instead of, say, a log line or a teaser trailer or music or what have you. It's another way to actually learn for yourself what it is about your film that will call to people, and that will help you know what to keep, what to lose, and how to approach certain scenes. But I caught up with one of my fellow lab members in LA last year, and he said that was the one thing that stuck with him from that lab, and he still has the poster.
So I guess the other question is, now that you're going online, is there a particular strategy for your online release?
Not particularly. I guess we're sort of still developing some of it. It's just trying to get views to it. And, you know, we've built up a couple resources that we can sort of share with, you know, a couple funny gifs and stuff. Again, there's a lot you can do with a hand in a blue glove to try and make people obviously check it out. I guess it's just trying to build that, trying to find the audience who we think will respond to it most, you know, whether that's chasing hell vasectomy forums or, you know, trying to leverage some of the Australian celebrity we have in it as well. You know, because we've got some pretty high caliber actors who are all doing pretty big stuff. And you know, again, that's a similar, just coming back to the poster stuff. We didn't actually include anyone's faces in the poster, which was a choice that we were back and forth, because they weren't famous enough necessarily to convey it to international audiences where we were sending the film. You know, they were all pretty local actors of good caliber, but I don't think they sell it when you take it overseas. You know, and I think that the iconographic nature of just a hand just sort of tells you that it's comedy as well. It feels funny. And, you know, that's an intangible in some ways, but it's trying to just leverage all the elements together to try and get as many people and many eyeballs to check it out. You know, I think it's quite a universal story. So hopefully that plays. And then
Look, as the writer, one of the reasons why I came on board is I think that logline is an amazing logline, and I think it creates fuel enough to sell a feature film as well. And we have a rough treatment of a feature that still could do with a bit more Chaz and Ben crashing the idea around until it's the best version of itself. But we've already, hopefully by this point, already released an episode where Stu and I talk about taking the script to market early, or the idea to market early, before choosing to invest time in it. Ben, both you and I have tested the feature ideas separately at market, and there is interest there. So I guess my hope is eventually, please, dear listeners, watch the film, like it, and clamor for the feature version.
Of course, and that would be fantastic. You know, that's always the goal, but at least it's a real proof of our collaboration and that we can do this stuff, you know. It shows that we're ready to step up to the next level, hopefully, to people who can hire us as well. And I think it works. I think it's just a lot of the challenges are just in the market in Australia, and, you know, the way that it is at the moment, particularly, not that we have to be limited to Australia by any stretch, is just being able to take that and leverage it further. You know, there are just hard realities of it's all going all over the place at the moment. But I think, you know, we have the confidence and throw comedy onto your reel now. You know, that's important to show, and you can work with that. We can work with actors and give them really good stuff to say. And again, you know, it's a credit to the script that and Chaz's work on it that we got the actors we did. You know, they didn't have to sign up. They're pretty big actors in the there's a few Logies between them all, which is fantastic that they sign on because the script was strong and they could relate to it, you know. And that's what, you know, if you're a producer, I guess that's what you're looking for, right? Is finding people who can write material for actors to perform that is believable and works. And I think, yeah, it's a credit to yourself that it has, and they did.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Is there anything else we want to cover about the Snippy?
I don't know. I think I'm pretty good. Are you guys happy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me, I suppose.
Yeah, no worries.
You suppose. If you want to watch a short film about a guy who gets a vasectomy without telling his wife, please go to the show notes. It's now live online. Written by me, directed and produced by Ben, edited by Stu. And if you want to get more Draft Zero more often, please consider becoming a Patreon. In particular, thanks to our Uber Patreons, Chris, Daniel, Jack, Jesse, Crob, Mateo, Nick, Sandra, and Thais. Thanks, guys.
If you feel so compelled to argue with Chaz and myself about anything on this episode or anything in general, you can find many ways to contact us at draft-zero.com. At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes. You'll also find a link to us on Apple Podcasts, so you can share the word that way and rate us and review us, which is very important for spreading the word. If you're feeling especially supportive and maybe even a little bit generous, you can find a link to our Patreon page. And thanks for listening.